General Muntu, you were an army commander for close to 10 years. When you see the very person who currently sitting in that position you were in, ordering the abduction of people from the streets, tweeting on his official account, proudly saying, we have this person who's in the basement, he's learning Runyankole, being released with wounds and images and his head, his beard shaved. What comes into your mind?
No gunfire, no headlines, no dramatic fall of power. And yet, Uganda may already be under military rule, led not by a general through war, but by a son through blood. General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, the president's son, was never elected, but somehow he's now the most powerful man in the country. So how did Uganda quietly slide from a republic into a family-run fortress, without anyone calling it a coup? Let's find out. If Uganda now feels like a family-run military enterprise, it's because it was built that way from the very beginning. Long before General Muhoozi appeared in uniform or sent a single tweet, his father, President Yoweri Museveni, was crafting a system so carefully wired to his image that it could survive only by multiplying him. Museveni didn't just lead a revolution in 1986. He started a political experiment in permanent control. The mission wasn't to govern for 5 years or 10. It was to design a system that made it impossible for him to leave and harder still for anyone else to enter. From his first term onward, Museveni treated Uganda less like a nation and more like a fortress under construction. And every layer of that fortress was laid with 3 ingredients: loyalty, fear, and replacement. One of Museveni's earliest moves was to fuse the lines between military and civilian authority. Instead of seeing the army as a tool of the state, he made the army the state's immune system, defending not just borders but his rule. Key ministries were peppered with military men. Political opponents were either co-opted into his party or left out in the cold. Parliament, rather than opposing the presidency, became a chamber of obedient technicians, many of whom owed their political careers to the man they were meant to check. But the most critical mechanism wasn't in the laws. It was in the people. Museveni filled the upper echelons of government with a network of loyalists, many of them from his region, tribe, or even extended family. He didn't install professionals. He installed believers. Ministers, generals, judges, media executives, they weren't just working for the regime. They were part of it, with their livelihoods, protection, and even survival tied to Museveni's continued rule. And just in case the system ever failed him, Museveni engineered a series of preemptive legal strikes. Term limits? Gone in 2005. Age limits? Scrapped in 2017. Constitutional restraints became suggestions. Checks and balances were rewritten as formalities. The judiciary wasn't abolished, it was absorbed. The Electoral Commission wasn't dismantled, it was reprogrammed. In the process, a dangerous but effective truth emerged. Uganda didn't have institutions, it had Museveni-shaped instruments, and because they functioned so well for him, they couldn't function for anyone else. But a system like that can't last forever. Leaders age, bodies slow down, and even fortresses built from loyalty begin to erode under the weight of time. Museveni knew that. And that's where his long-term thinking became visible. He didn't just want to rule until he died. He wanted to make sure the structure lived on through someone who wouldn't dismantle it, but inherit it. That's where his son comes in. But not yet. Before Muhoozi could rise, Museveni had to test the system's obedience to blood over law. Quietly, he began appointing family members to sensitive roles. His brother, General Salim Saleh, became a core figure in military and economic strategy. Other relatives were positioned in intelligence, revenue services, and state-owned enterprises. This wasn't favoritism, it was field testing. If the system resisted, he would adjust. But it didn't. It complied. And once that machinery proved loyal, not just to the president but to the Museveni name, a new question emerged. Could power be passed down, not through the election but through inheritance? Uganda was ready for the experiment. The ground had been laid, the checks had been removed. The old generals had retired. The new class of power brokers were men who owed their positions, and often their entire careers, to the presidential family. This didn't mean the public was prepared, or even aware. That was the brilliance of it. The architecture was invisible to most. The takeover was not declared, it was planted inside the very organs of the state. By the time anyone would notice, it wouldn't look like a transition at all. It would look like Muhoozi had always belonged. Which brings us to the next chapter, not about what Museveni built, but about the son he had been quietly preparing to walk through that door all along. So who exactly is General Muhoozi Kainerugaba? And why was he never meant to be just a soldier? By the time Uganda's political system was fully engineered to serve one bloodline, the only thing left was to train the heir, not to campaign, but to command. And so, long before the public knew his name, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba was being shaped, not as a politician, but as the human extension of the Museveni system. Born in 1974 in Dar es Salaam during his father's rebel days, Muhoozi grew up in the shadow of conflict and ideology. But while most rebel leaders' children ended up disconnected from state affairs, Muhoozi was not left to drift. His grooming was not informal. It was strategically academic, military, and symbolic, a long-term project to produce a successor who wouldn't just inherit office, but understand its architecture down to the bolts. His education tells the story. He didn't go to Uganda's army schools, he went global. He attended the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst in the UK, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, where even British royals train. From there, he moved to Egypt's military academy, learning in a region known for its military-led governments. Then he went to the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, a facility that trains high-ranking officers to manage national-level command structures. But this wasn't about prestige, it was about strategy alignment. Muhoozi's training wasn't just designed to teach him how to fire weapons or read maps. He was being taught how to manage systems of control, how to run intelligence and counterinsurgency programs, and how to maintain command across institutions. In short, he wasn't learning how to defend Uganda. He was learning how to inherit it without resistance. When he returned, the handovers began. First, he was appointed commander of the Presidential Guard Brigade, the elite group charged with Museveni's protection. But his real power came with the creation of the Special Forces Command, SFC, a unit redesigned and expanded specifically for him. Unlike the regular army, the SFC didn't just carry out security operations, it handled intelligence raids, guarded oil installations, secured state assets, and even ran foreign operations. With Muhoozi at the helm, the SFC became a parallel state, answering only to the president, bypassing civilian oversight, and often overshadowing the Ministry of Defense itself. But titles were never the goal. The real mission was conditioning, the slow transformation of Muhoozi from a trained officer into a political entity with military legitimacy. While his father kept up the image of an aging but active president, Muhoozi was being made visible to key stakeholders: the army, the ruling party, foreign allies, and eventually the public. His promotions were methodical, from brigadier general to major general within a span that few officers ever experience. Then, in 2024, to Chief of Defense Forces, the top military post in Uganda. Each promotion was less about competence and more about visibility. Museveni was placing him on the map, introducing him not through policy but power. Here is the man who can summon troops, control intelligence, and decide who gets raided in the night. Yet behind the scenes, Muhoozi wasn't just absorbing authority. He was absorbing the language of nationalism. He began posting about patriotism, military pride, and discipline. Carefully worded statements that echoed the revolutionary ethos his father once used. But where Museveni quoted ideology, Muhoozi quoted order. Not democracy, not constitutionality, loyalty, hierarchy, obedience. That's how the son was crafted, not as a replica of Museveni, but as a version updated for an era where soft power is out and military certainty is in. In a region where coups are rising and ballots are weakening, Muhoozi became Uganda's signal to the continent. We don't need your votes. We have our power. But his presence was still quiet, until it wasn't. The real shift began when Muhoozi stopped acting like a general and started speaking like a ruler, not in press conferences, but in something far more dangerous: tweets. Because while his grooming was silent, his rise to public dominance came with a digital roar, unfiltered, undiplomatic, and unafraid. So how did Muhoozi go from a calculated military heir to the most chaotic political voice in East Africa? Here's a quick reminder. Please like, share, and subscribe to Black Culture Unlocked for powerful Black news, real stories of our heroes and leaders, and the rich culture and history the world tried to forget. When most political dynasties rise, they speak softly at first. Trial speeches, stage-managed interviews, carefully worded promises. But not General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. His rise wasn't launched in parliament or on state TV. It exploded in the open battlefield of social media. Ugandans didn't first fear Muhoozi because of his guns. They feared him because of his keyboard, because the moment Muhoozi discovered Twitter, the carefully scripted narrative of a calm, disciplined officer shattered into something entirely different. A chaotic, unfiltered, digitally armed strongman. It began subtly enough. A few harmless tweets praising the army, photos with fellow officers, musings on Pan-Africanism. But very quickly, Muhoozi's timeline transformed into a direct channel of power, an ongoing monologue where diplomacy, military strategy, national security, and personal ego all blurred into one running commentary. And he didn't hold back. In 2022, Muhoozi stunned the region when he tweeted that Uganda's army could invade Kenya and capture Nairobi in 2 weeks. This wasn't a joke. He didn't delete it. He doubled down. And when Kenya's leadership responded with confusion and concern, Uganda's Ministry of Foreign Affairs was forced to issue a formal apology while Muhoozi kept tweeting. That moment revealed two things. Muhoozi was not being controlled. Muhoozi was being protected. Despite the international backlash, Museveni didn't punish his son. Instead, he briefly removed him as commander of land forces, only to promote him months later to an even higher position, Chief of Defense Forces. It sent a clear message to the world. Muhoozi can say what he wants and the system will adapt. His timeline soon turned darker. In May 2025, he tweeted images of Eddie Mutwe, the bodyguard of opposition leader Bobi Wine, bloodied, restrained, and allegedly tortured under Muhoozi's direct command. In the same tweet, he warned other opposition figures that, "We know where you all live." This wasn't trolling. It was a public confession of a human rights violation, broadcast without fear. No police inquiry, no media uproar, no accountability, just likes, retweets, and fear. For supporters, Muhoozi became a mythic figure, a no-nonsense commander cutting through bureaucracy and foreign interference. For critics, he became a walking national security threat, turning Uganda's foreign relations and internal stability into his playground. And that's exactly how Muhoozi wanted it. Unlike Museveni, who crafted his power through quiet control and long-term planning, Muhoozi manufactures chaos on demand. His unpredictability is his armor. His public missteps aren't political liabilities, they're acts of dominance. Every time he tweets something outrageous and nothing happens to him, he proves what his father built. This system cannot correct him because it was designed for him. But this isn't just about personality, it's about platform warfare. Muhoozi's social media use isn't accidental. It reflects a new kind of 21st century authoritarianism, where leaders don't need to hold press conferences or control newspapers. They just need a smartphone. It's cheaper, faster, and more terrifying. And with over 500,000 followers, Muhoozi doesn't just speak to Ugandans. He speaks to soldiers, foreign leaders, exiled dissidents, and political elites across Africa. He doesn't just make statements. He issues warnings. His tweets have touched on everything from overthrowing governments to eliminating traitors to attacking foreign embassies. Sometimes they sound like jokes, sometimes like war declarations. They always carry one message: I can say anything, I can do anything, and no one will stop me. And so far, no one has. This is the danger. Muhoozi is not waiting for power. He is already wielding it in real time, using Twitter as both a megaphone and minefield. He is testing limits, and with each post that escapes punishment, he redraws Uganda's boundaries of acceptable authoritarian behavior. But the digital storm is only half the story. Behind the screen, something far more structural was happening. Muhoozi was not just tweeting into the void, he was tweeting with the backing of a military that was slowly absorbing the entire state. So how did Uganda's army stop serving the government and start becoming the government? While Muhoozi Kainerugaba's tweets made noise online, something far more dangerous was happening off-screen. Uganda's military was swallowing its civilian state, one institution at a time. This was not a takeover with tanks or gunfire, it was quiet, surgical. A slow erosion of boundaries between civil governance and armed command. It's easy to mistake Muhoozi's rise as just the story of one man growing more powerful. But that's only half the truth. The other half is that while Uganda watched his tweets, the army crossed over the walls of governance until it no longer served the state. It became the state. And it didn't happen all at once. It began years earlier with strategic placements. Military officers started appearing in civil institutions, not as security consultants, but as decision makers. A retired colonel was appointed to lead the Uganda Revenue Authority. Former generals were installed in local councils. A brigadier took over the Electoral Commission's logistics division. Suddenly, uniforms became common in places that once handled taxes, roads, and voter registration. At first, the justification was efficiency. Soldiers were praised for their discipline, their command of systems, and their no-nonsense approach. But what went unnoticed was the cost. Civilian oversight disappeared. These weren't just public servants in camo, they were commanders operating outside democratic structures. And once that door opened, it never shut. By 2024, the military had embedded itself into at least 11 major non-defense sectors: border control, immigration, health logistics, public procurement, infrastructure planning, and even public universities. Civilian administrators found themselves reporting to men with ranks instead of titles. The chain of command replaced the chain of accountability. The Ministry of Internal Affairs now works side by side with intelligence officers. The Electoral Commission, tasked with delivering fair elections, operates under the quiet influence of security agencies. Even foreign aid programs in agriculture and education are sometimes led by former army officers appointed directly by the State House. But this isn't just about personnel, it's about culture. Once the military enters an institution, it brings with it a new set of rules: hierarchy, secrecy, and obedience. Questions are replaced with orders. Meetings become briefings, performance becomes discipline, and crucially, dissent becomes treason. Even journalists have reported being followed or questioned by army-affiliated individuals, despite working on topics unrelated to national security. Why? Because under a militarized system, every topic becomes a security issue, even healthcare, even elections, even school curriculum. This environment creates what analysts call governance by intimidation. Technocrats become timid. Policymakers grow cautious. Nobody wants to be accused of undermining national stability. And because the lines between civilian and military are so blurred, it's hard to tell where law ends and threat begins. But the most chilling part is how normalized it all feels. There was no national debate, no referendum, no emergency declaration. The soldiers didn't march in with guns. They walked in through appointments, reshuffles, and memos. And because it happened so gradually, the public adapted. Uganda's democracy wasn't dismantled, it was reformatted. And this restructuring serves one man more than any other, Muhoozi. With the military sitting inside every major arm of the state, he doesn't need to win elections to govern. He doesn't even need a cabinet. He simply needs loyal officers in key offices, and he already has them. His ascent is not symbolic, it's operational. The state has been conditioned to obey uniforms, and its uniform is the most visible in the country. So while international observers ask if Muhoozi will run for president, they misunderstand the terrain. He doesn't need to run. He's already inside the system that counts the votes, deploys the police, controls the intelligence, and regulates the press. He is not trying to become the state. He is already in control of the state's machinery. And this is what makes Uganda's transformation so unique. There was no violent coup, no civil war, no suspension of the constitution, just uniforms in meetings, generals in boardrooms, and one family at the top watching it all converge. But this shift came with a cost. In militarizing the state, the space for politics didn't just shrink, it disappeared. And the first to feel the consequences were those who still believed in opposition. So what happened to Uganda's political rivals, and why has their silence grown so loud? The answer, as history often warns, is silence. Not the kind born from apathy, but the kind forced by fear, threats, surveillance, and disappearance. Uganda has always had opposition voices, but never have they operated in an environment so completely engineered to mute them. Because once the army became the state, opposition was no longer the rival of power. It became an enemy of the regime. And enemies in military logic are not debated. They're neutralized. The dismantling of Uganda's opposition did not begin with bullets. It began with language. Terms like national stability, foreign agents, and subversive elements slowly crept into public statements. Criticism of the government was no longer a political right. It was rebranded as a threat to national security. And once labeled a threat, everything else followed predictably: harassment, detention, blacklisting, or worse. Take the case of Robert Kyagulanyi, better known as Bobi Wine. A popular musician turned opposition leader, Bobi once drew crowds in the millions. Young, charismatic, and fearless, he threatened to awaken an entire generation against Museveni's aging rule. But the machine was ready for him. Before the 2021 election, Bobi's campaign was attacked daily. His rallies were banned under COVID restrictions that somehow never applied to government events. His vehicles were blocked on highways, his campaign offices were raided, his supporters were abducted, and some were found later with signs of torture. Others were never seen again. During the final weeks of the election, Bobi himself was placed under house arrest, cut off from media, lawyers, even food deliveries. When the results came and declaring Museveni the winner once again, the streets were quiet. Not because the people believed them, but because the people understood resistance had become fatal. This wasn't isolated, it was systemic. Other opposition parties, like the Forum for Democratic Change (FDC), Alliance for National Transformation (ANT), and even independent activists faced similar fates. Bank accounts frozen, NGO licenses revoked. Journalists arrested for publishing unauthorized information. Entire radio stations were shut down mid-broadcast for airing interviews with opposition members. Even courts, once seen as a final shield for civil liberties, began dismissing cases involving political detentions or election rigging. Legal appeals vanished into endless bureaucratic loops. Lawyers faced intimidation themselves. One human rights attorney, known for defending political prisoners, was attacked in broad daylight by unidentified assailants, a case that predictably went nowhere. But perhaps the most chilling tactic was the invisible war. Surveillance, both physical and digital. Opposition phones were tapped, movement tracked, WhatsApp groups infiltrated, private conversations became public accusations. In such an atmosphere, organizing a protest was like walking through a minefield. Paranoia became survival. And yet, the state never had to formally outlaw opposition. It simply made participation too dangerous to be worth it. What makes this model effective and terrifying is that it doesn't rely on open war. It relies on quiet consequences. You're not arrested for running in elections. You're arrested for tax evasion. You're not beaten for giving a speech. You're beaten by unknown assailants. The repressor wears a suit and tie. It files paperwork. It hosts press briefings. And all the while, the army stands in the background, not pointing guns, but making sure everyone knows they could. In such a climate, silence is not an absence of protest. It is the sound of survival. And this is what Muhoozi has inherited, a state where opposition doesn't need to be banned because it has been rendered functionally impossible. By the time he takes the stage, there will be no serious rivals left to challenge him, not because they lost support, but because they were forced into the shadows, exile, or surrender. This is why the debate over Muhoozi's future presidential bid feels so hollow. Who is there to challenge him? What party? What court? What public square remains unguarded, unwatched, unfiltered? But even this strategy, total suppression, has its risks. Because when a system silences everyone, it begins to fear even whispers. And that fear can lead to desperate decisions. The question now isn't whether Muhoozi will face opposition. It's whether he'll allow any election at all. So what exactly is planned for 2026, and will Uganda even pretend to go through the motions of democracy? With Uganda's opposition silenced, civil institutions militarized, and public fear turned into silence, the next big event looms like a scripted finale, the 2026 presidential election. But calling it an election might be generous. What's being prepared for 2026 is not a vote, it's a political performance. One designed not to determine leadership but to cement it. And the lead actor has already been chosen, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. The clues are everywhere, but you have to read them through the lens of a regime that no longer needs to ask permission. For months, Uganda's state media has begun soft-launching Muhoozi's public image, not as a soldier, but as a visionary. They show him meeting youth leaders, launching local initiatives, inspecting government programs, always framed as decisive, modern, and uncorrupted by the old politics. The message is clear. He's not just the son of the president, he's the future of the republic. And yet, the National Resistance Movement, NRM, hasn't officially declared a candidate. Museveni has stayed vague. He hasn't endorsed Muhoozi publicly, nor ruled himself out. Why? Because that ambiguity is strategic. The longer the public remains unsure whether Museveni or Muhoozi will run, the harder it is for any opposition figure, if one still dares, to form a coherent campaign. No one knows who they'll face, what tactics will be used, or if the election will even happen at all. This uncertainty is not a flaw, it's part of the control mechanism. Behind closed doors, two scenarios are being modeled. One, the civilian mask. Muhoozi resigns from the army and is introduced as the NRM's civilian candidate. This move allows him to claim legitimacy under the Constitution, which requires military officers to be retired before standing for public office. His father publicly steps aside with a full ceremony, offering the image of a smooth, peaceful transition. But beneath that handover, the old structure remains unchanged. Museveni continues to operate behind the scenes. Military command stays within the family's control. Muhoozi inherits power already aligned to him, not because he earned it, but because it was designed for him. The election becomes a rubber stamp, not a competition. If opposition figures show signs of gaining traction, or if international pressure increases, a different script is ready. Manufactured instability. It could be an insurgent threat, a national crisis, or a foreign plot to destabilize the country. Under this justification, elections are postponed indefinitely. Muhoozi is appointed as interim leader tasked with restoring national order. The military remains deployed in major cities. Civil liberties are suspended, temporarily, of course. This scenario gives Muhoozi power without risking a ballot at all, and it plays well with the authoritarian model he's publicly admired, especially from countries where order justifies indefinite rule. Either path leads to the same result: Muhoozi in charge and Uganda's political horizon locked for the foreseeable future. What's different about 2026 is that there's no longer any need to pretend it's democratic. The 2021 election was full of arrests, internet blackouts, and violence, yet the government still made the effort to appear legitimate. But after successfully crushing opposition, absorbing the judiciary, and co-opting key institutions, the regime may not even bother with appearances this time. And the international community? Already distracted, already divided. As long as Uganda maintains stability, provides mineral access, and participates in regional security operations, Western governments are unlikely to intervene, especially when many of them are forming quiet partnerships with autocratic regimes elsewhere. Muhoozi knows this. His father knew it before him, which is why 2026 won't be about winning an election. It'll be about formalizing what already exists: a family-run military state with a civilian face and no reverse gear. By the time General Muhoozi Kainerugaba fully assumes control, whether through an election, emergency decree, or mere inheritance, Uganda will no longer resemble the country it was just a decade ago. The opposition will have been defanged. Institutions will obey commands, not constitutions. Civil society will operate on whispers, and the country's foreign alliances will favor silence over scrutiny. But here lies the paradox. The very system that secures Muhoozi's rule is the same system that risks destroying it from within. It's the classic problem of authoritarian design, what some call the fortress paradox. You can build high walls, you can arm the guards, you can control the exits. But eventually, the air inside grows stale, and the more you fortify, the more disconnected you become, not just from the world, but from your people. In the short term, Muhoozi's Uganda may seem stable. Streets may be calm, elections may be quiet. The international press may have moved on, but authoritarian calm is deceptive. It doesn't mean peace, it means repression is working. And that has an expiration date. The first fault line is within the regime itself. While Museveni ruled through ideological loyalty, Muhoozi ruled through military hierarchy and personal branding. His power doesn't come from revolution, it comes from inheritance. That difference matters, especially in the eyes of older generals, long-serving ministers, and factions who were loyal to Museveni, not his bloodline. Already rumblings have begun inside the UPDF. Senior officers sidelined to make room for Muhoozi loyalists are watching closely. Some quietly resent how quickly their careers have been eclipsed by the president's son. Others fear that Muhoozi's impulsive style, especially his online outbursts, could trigger diplomatic or military fallout they'll be forced to clean up. In regimes built on fear and loyalty, loyalty is never permanent. It's conditional, and Muhoozi's continued dominance will depend on how well he balances fear with reward, power with paranoia. The second risk is economic stagnation. With Western partnerships fading and new allies like Russia and China focused on military and infrastructure deals, not human development, Uganda's access to soft capital will shrink. The EU, previously one of Uganda's largest trade and aid partners, has already begun freezing non-essential funding. The U.S. Congress is debating sanctions related to human rights abuses. Foreign investors are pulling out of sensitive sectors like tech, media, and finance. The projects that remain, dams, roads, weapons, are long-term and debt-heavy. They may produce political optics, but they won't put food on the table. And when the economy slows, even soldiers get restless. History has shown, across Guinea, Sudan, and Burkina Faso, that loyalty fades quickly when the salaries stop coming. The third and most unpredictable threat is the people themselves. Uganda's population is young. Over 75% of the country is under the age of 30. These are not citizens who grew up under Idi Amin or Milton Obote. They came of age with smartphones, access to global information, and a sense of political awareness that cannot be easily turned off. Many of them backed Bobi Wine not because he was perfect, but because he symbolized an alternative. They have now been pushed into silence. But silence is never static. It listens. It stores anger. It builds networks underground. And when it breaks, it does not ask for permission. Regimes like Muhoozi's often mistake fear for loyalty. But the day fear evaporates, whether due to crisis, scandal, or economic shock, the illusion collapses fast. What took decades to build can be undone in weeks. And finally, there's the regional wildcard. East Africa is changing. Sudan has fractured. Ethiopia is navigating instability. Rwanda and Burundi remain tense. Kenya, once a democratic example, is facing protests and discontent. The African continent is no longer predictable. In that chaos, Uganda's militarized model may either inspire imitators or become a cautionary tale. If Muhoozi miscalculates, alienating a powerful general, failing to prevent economic decline, or sparking unexpected protest, the regime may not fall in a blaze of glory. It may rot slowly from the inside, leaving behind a shell of control with no substance. Because in the end, the problem with building a fortress is not just that people can't get in, it's that eventually the truth can't get out. And when leaders can't hear their people, they're not ruling, they're waiting. So the final question isn't just whether Muhoozi will take power, it's whether he'll survive what that power inevitably becomes. Do you think what is happening in Uganda is right? Should locals be allowed to decide it? Let us know in the comment section, who do you think should rule Uganda? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it, because here we tell the stories no one else will. From ancient African civilizations to modern Black excellence, we reveal the truth, the power, and the legacy they tried to erase. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.